Worried about work, family, or other relationships? I'm Chuck Wolf, a pioneer in emotional intelligence. When live on the Emotion Roadmap, I use a proven 4-question framework to turn emotional roadblocks into clear next steps on air in real time. Join us Tuesdays at 5 p.m., twice a month on YouTube. Subscribe, go to YouTube, type in @CJWOLFE5, and ask to be notified when I'm live so you don't miss a show. Call in when you see the number on screen. In 1990, the psychologists who sparked the science of emotions asked me to help translate their research into everyday tools. I built the Emotion Roadmap, a simple 4-question model that helps anyone improve how they manage their feelings and influence others ethically and effectively. On the Emotion Roadmap, take the wheel and control how you feel. We turn worry into clarity and stress into strategy. Each 45-minute episode blends practical psychology, common sense tools, guest experts, and live caller coaching. Smart, capable people often get stuck when emotions run high, and this show helps you get unstuck fast. When you call, you help everyone else who listens. As I help you, I explain how the Emotion Roadmap works so that everyone listening is learning to use the process. To learn more about me, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. I have been very lucky in life and have worked with and learned from some of the greatest thinkers in the world at Harvard and Yale, other places, and I want to bring what I have learned to hopefully make a meaningful, positive difference in your lives. Enjoy and tell your friends and your family.
And this is Chuck Wolf, and you're listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And I'm live streaming at Simsbury Media, and I'm very glad to be here. I've been away for a few weeks. I've been in some warmer places, some places that were pretty sunny and higher temperatures, and now we're back to the snow and the cold. And one of the things I was thinking about is what makes you happy? You know, it's interesting when you're away on vacation and you're really enjoying yourself and you're thinking you're coming back to a winter when you've gone someplace warm. You start to think, well, I wonder if I should stay a little longer if I could afford to. But I also want to be home. I really like being home. And I began to think about, what makes you happy? And then there was, I just read some really interesting literature in the emotional intelligence world about, happiness and what makes you happy. And I have a few different angles on that. And I thought I'd ask you if you have a sense of what makes you happy, because sometimes even just talking about happiness brings you some joy, makes you feel good about yourself and feel good about where you are and what you can do in case you're not feeling happy. Because sometimes when you don't see a lot of sun, or even if the sun's out, but it's too cold for you to go outside because you just the chill in your bones just doesn't feel inviting for you to go out. So it's the kind of thing I think that makes you wonder, when is it going to be over? When is it going to be spring again? But what if you could just enjoy the moment, enjoy being present, enjoy what you have? So I'm going to ask you, if you want to call and you have something that you'd like to say about what makes you happy, and just thinking about it and talking about it, cheer you up a bit. Or are you already feeling happy? Because I know there's people in my own family that love to ski. And so the snow in the winter, maybe not so much the very single-digit teens weather we've had, that doesn't make them so happy. But, when anything in maybe 15 to 25 or 35, anything between maybe 15 and 35 is good skiing weather for them. They enjoy themselves. They really like going out and having fun as a family. They go and skiing. I have friends who go skiing. Some people just like to sled. Some people just really enjoy the winter. And they enjoy every single season. And again, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of the theoretical stuff that supports what makes people happy. But also, if you feel like it, it'd be lovely to have you call in. So you should be able to see at the top of your screen numbers to call in by. So you call the number, and then it asks you for your PIN, and then you put the PIN in and then the pound sign. So I'll read it to you. And so if you're thinking that, yeah, I'd like to say something about happiness and you feel like giving me a call, again, I'm Chuck Wolf. The show's the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. Happiness is an emotion, and it's something that we can control and we can influence, and I'd like to help you with that today. So here's the numbers. 405-644-0050. And then once you get through that, and I'll give it to you again. And by the way, don't be afraid to call in. I'm a friendly host. I'm just interested in other people's voices. I think it makes the show a little bit more rich if we've got people that want to call in and share what makes them happy. And so again, the number is 405-649-0050. Once you've done that, you enter the PIN. And the PIN is 927-263-232 in the pound sign. Now, again, everybody who's watching this live stream, you should see it on your screen. But in case you might just be listening and not watching, one more time, 405-649-0050, and then the PIN, 927-263-232 in the pound sign. Okay. Those of you who have listened to me before, you might notice my voice is a little deeper. So I caught a cold on the way home. One of the things about traveling that isn't fun, that doesn't make me happy, is sometimes when you're a long distance away, you'll end up taking these overnight flights. And I find it somewhat challenging to get a decent night's sleep when I'm traveling overnight on a plane. Now, those of you that can afford those beds that lie flat, well, you're in a whole different category. But once in a while, I've had the pleasure of being able to do that. But it just seems so crazy to spend so much money on that. Most of the time we don't ride that way. We do. There's something in between that they've come up with the airlines, something called Economy Plus or Premium Economy. It's a little crazy too, but not quite as crazy. Anyway, so what makes me happy? What is it that I conceive of that's important to share with you? Is this idea of thinking about what doesn't make me happy is sometimes helpful in terms of what does make me happy. So as a young kid growing up, I was working class. There were times when we struggled a bit financially, economically. We didn't have what other kids had. I always thought that money was going to be a big fix for that. If I could be successful somehow and make a lot of money, then maybe that would make me happy. And I've been successful and I've done well enough. But the goal for me, it seemed, was partly to be able to say that I'd done that. But then what happens with the money? What do you do with the money? Does it really make you happy? Does a really big house make you happy? Does a fancy car make you happy? And to some degree, the answer is yes. But not with a lot of other things surrounding it. I think material things make a difference. It's certainly easier sometimes to be happy when you're well-to-do than it might be if you're really strapped financially and you're living check to check. But that flies in the face of something that I experienced as a young kid growing up which was, and this is there's three people, again, I want to talk about today. Again, I know people tune in at different times. So one of the persons that I want to talk about is my uncle. My Uncle Hack was my mother's youngest brother. She only had one brother, but he was the youngest child in the family. My mom was the middle child. She had an older sister. And my Uncle Hack was this guy who never seemed to have a lot in life, and yet seemed to have a lot in life. And I'll explain what I mean. He seemed to have just enough. He always had a little bit of money in his pocket. He always had a car to drive. So that's a lot more than some people have. But it wasn't necessarily a new car or a special car. He didn't have very much money. But what was special about my Uncle Hack was his attitude towards life. He was an uncle that called me every time I had a celebration of some kind, whether it was my birthday or my anniversary, and he called my wife too when we got married and spoke to her on her birthday. And he called his nephews and nieces. And he was always just, "How you doing, Chuck? How are you?" I'm thinking about you. I care about you. How are you? And it made me feel really special. I mean, I had other aunts and uncles and relatives that I liked a lot, but he was the only one they called all the time on those special occasions. And then when I got the chance, I'd go and visit him. And when I visited with him, I'd see he lived in a house that, was a 3-floor house and in Revere, Massachusetts. And it wasn't that special a house, it was a place to live. But he was happy living in it. He was happy going to the supermarket. And if his car bumped into somebody, he said, "Excuse me, and how are you? I'm sorry I bumped into you. How are you doing?" And all of a sudden, he'd be in a conversation with somebody he had never met before. And he'd talk for 5 or 10 minutes. And they'd go away smiling from the conversation. And my Uncle Hack was someone who didn't have a lot and yet had a lot. He had more than most people I knew that were in terms of circumstances and financial material goals. He hadn't really achieved that much. But that wasn't what life was about for him. It was about being there for other people, being there for his daughter. He has a lovely daughter who's still with us, and occasionally I would pick up the phone and call, and we talk about her dad and talk about how life is for her. But he always, when I think about the idea of what makes people happy, I start with my Uncle Hack, which just had it very simple. He had a cousin who he went into business with. This cousin of mine too, and that cousin and he had a deli in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was fun deli. I used to love to go and sometimes help out a little bit, but mostly just he'd give me a free sandwich, free corned beef or a pastrami sandwich or something, and it was delightful to see him and to be there. And then at some point the deli wasn't working, then they sold it, and my cousin didn't treat him so well. In my mind, I would be very mad at that person, my cousin, if they did something where, the equity in the deal didn't seem to be fair. My uncle was, he needed it more than me. It's okay. I go back to him every once in a while when I'm thinking about, boy, I wish I had something that somebody else has that I don't, or I'm envious of somebody might have done better at certain things than I had wished I had done well at. And so I start with that. So whatever you have, if you can be happy with whatever you have, with whoever you're with, however they treat you, as long as you love them and care about them, you're okay with that somehow. That's how he found happiness. And to me, that I don't think I'm going to say anything more important than what I just shared with you. And so since this will be live streamed on my YouTube channel and on the Simsbury channel, I hope you get to see it. So what makes you happy? Again, the number to call, in case you want to share what makes you happy, 405-649-0050. And the PIN, after you call the number, is 927-263-232 and the pound sign. So after the long plane flights, we had a couple of them, and a couple of overnight flights not too far apart. And so I ended up with a cold. Not the worst thing that can happen to you, but I was thinking about coming in today, and then I thought about what is it that I wanted to come in and talk about today. So one of the things I'm talking about today is happiness, and I wanted to talk about 3 people, and the other 2 people I wanted to talk about were Viktor Frankl and Socrates. Now, Viktor Frankl, probably a lot of people don't know who he is, but he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was a prisoner during the Holocaust, and yet somehow his body was imprisoned, but in some meaningful way, his mind didn't seem to be. And he talked about how even when they can constrain your body, torture your body, harm you physically, there's a place and a part of us that is sacred and can be protected by our minds and can be free no matter what the circumstances outwardly are. Now, I realize for most people that's really hard to see. He wrote a book. It's still in print. Again, the Holocaust happened a long time ago, but it was powerful and meaningful, and so many people were traumatized by what happened to them and their families and their relatives. And he was too, but somehow he seemed in his mind to be able to rise above that. And he created a book from his experiences that many people around the world have read that provide some help and hope for them, because it provides a way of thinking no matter what's happening to me physically. What if Stephen Hawkins, incredibly physically, a lot of physical disabilities relative to the disease he was living with, still had an incredible mind and seemed to experience joy and happiness despite the fact that most of us, given the limitations of his body, and would never have had that kind of experience that would be able to do that. Most of us, and most people did during the Holocaust, couldn't feel like somehow I'm free inside my mind. Most people don't seem to be able to do that. And yet I think it's something we can all work on and can become better at. And so it's one of those things that, can I create happiness through purpose, through meaning, through what I think about, what I emotionally feel? Is there some way that I can influence through my mind my own degree of happiness? So Viktor Frankl was one of the people I suggest, if you haven't read this book and you're looking for a way to find purpose in life, I think you'll find it very meaningful and incredibly powerful and compelling. Man's Search for Meaning. And then somebody else I always like to think about sometimes, and I think life is great when you have lots of questions and you learn from other people, and your questions are good and you make other people think, and it makes you think. And sometimes wherever you might start, you'll end up, both of you or several of you, whoever's talking together, if you're really listening hard to each other and you're open to new learning, that you can find greater knowledge, more purpose, more being, more feelings of positive feelings when you really listen and dialogue with other people. And one of the things that helps with dialogue is questions. Don't you enjoy when somebody wants to know about you, your life, what you believe, what makes you feel certain things, what makes you happy, what makes you sad, who your heroes are, what your hopes and dreams are? When somebody asks you those kind of questions, and then they wait and they listen, and then they repeat back to a degree what you've said so you know they're listening, and they're helping you think through some of the things that you've thought some about, but by somebody really acting as a sounding board and helping you to clarify your thoughts because they're really interested in you, it's another way to make other people happy. Now, sometimes, and one of the things I like is if somebody calls and has a challenge. My show originally, this concept of the emotion roadmap, take the wheel and control how you feel, started many years ago, 17 years ago, on a community radio station called WPKN. And on that radio station, over time, I built up an audience and people would call in with questions. And I hope someday this happens here too. They called in with questions and challenges that were happening in their life, and I walked them through what I call an emotion roadmap. And the roadmap, the show's called the Emotion Roadmap, is how do you get to where you want to be emotionally? Interestingly, as someone who has spent a lot of time learning about emotional intelligence, starting way back in the 1990s when it first was discovered by two brilliant psychologists, Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer. Peter went on to become the Yale president of Yale University, and Jack is a professor of psychology at the University of New Hampshire. And they discovered this idea that we have emotional abilities and emotional intelligence, different than our cognitive or analytic intelligence or general intelligence. So when I became knowledgeable about it, I began to see that we have a lot of ability to control how we feel. And so the show evolved when I was teaching a class about emotional intelligence in organizations, when a good friend and colleague, not at the time I was just meeting him, was a graduate student in my class. And he said, Chuck, I love this idea of how you're helping all of us in class deal with emotional circumstances in our lives that are highly challenging by teaching us about your emotion roadmap. Would you be willing to talk about it on air? And I thought, I want to reach as many people as I can. I think I've learned some things about emotional intelligence, about the science, and I've created some things on my own that make people better. And nothing makes me happier, me personally happier, than if I can help somebody else. I love being able to help people. Now, I have to be careful because my zeal, my excitement in wanting to help people, sometimes people don't want to be helped. I'm sure you've experienced that yourself. And so I have to be really careful about making sure people really want to be, helped. And I found some ways to do that too. In any case, Lou asked me if I'd go on the air on a radio station where he'd been a volunteer already for a number of years. And it was all volunteer programmers at the time, still is. And I said, sounds fascinating. What's involved? And so we talked about it. And 17 years ago, I started this program, this idea, the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. Now, that person, that friend, is Lou Pomalis. And Lou has a show on WPKN also. He does jazz and Latin music, and he's great at it. He's really a good radio programmer. And he's doing some work, I think, on the internet now, too, as well. But he also has a radio program on Trinity College, here in Hartford. On Trinity College, there's a radio station, 89.3 FM in Hartford, Connecticut. And Lou has a show on from 12 to 3. And I'm going to be on his show from 2 to 3 this Thursday coming up. So I'm looking forward to seeing Lou again after the vacation. And we try and encourage people to call in there. But I'm going to ask you to call in. If you got some questions or you just want to share some thoughts about what makes you happy. What do you think about happiness? What makes you happy? Are you wondering about how to become happy? And I can help you with that. But it could be about anything, really. If you've got something emotional, it's challenging in your life, and you want to call in, at some point I hope we start getting callers for this. But anyway, let me give you the number. Again, it's on your screen, but it's 405-649-0050. Once you dial the number, again, 405-649-0050, then put the PIN in, 927-263-232 #. And again, I'm Chuck Wolf, and the show is the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. Learn how to control how you feel. And today I'm talking about happiness, but if you want to talk about any feelings that you're having that you'd like to see change, again, give me a call. This show is on the air. Typically, it's on Tuesdays from 5 p.m. to 5:45 p.m. So it's on for 45 minutes. It's not every Tuesday. It's every other Tuesday. So if you sign on to my channel, or you sign on to the Simsbury Community Channel, you'll be notified when you're Simsbury Media channel. You'll be notified when you have the experience of having your cell phone or whatever computer on, and the show goes live. If you're a subscriber, you get notified. As long as you allow notifications, you'll get notified. So the other person I wanted to talk about was Socrates. Now, Socrates is a very interesting person for lots of reasons to me, because he was the most brilliant person. Excuse me. He was the most brilliant person at asking questions that made you think, that drove you into deep, deep levels of thought, deeper maybe than you'd ever experienced or explored before inside your own mind. So he used to ask people, what makes you happy? And through lots of conversations, over time, it emerged that through these conversations, Socrates seemed to think that happiness was sort of a package deal that came with virtue. Virtue by itself didn't create happiness, but doing the right thing made people happy. But not necessarily by itself. Doing the right thing might be a protest against something that you think is unjust. And while you're in the struggle, at that moment you may not be happy. When you go back and you reflect and you think, I did something I'm proud of. change, being able to create change, meaningful change that results in people living better lives, you living a better life, your family members living better lives, might make you happy. Socrates seemed to assume that doing the right thing matters, that you might be happy when you do something destructive, really negative, that impacts people in a way that's harmful to them, and yet makes you more powerful, brings you more money, brings you more things, more material things. But he didn't view that as true happiness. Kind of the way he talked about it was that that's more of not to say that people don't claim to be happy, but he thinks at the deepest levels that doesn't really generate happiness. So just having more necessarily might feel like it makes you happy, but when your relationships are sour, when you want to be loved by the people in your family and you're not, when you want to be able to talk to your child, your parent, your partner, and you're struggling, and you don't have a relationship anymore where you can talk to the people that you say you love and you say you care about. But you're powerful, you're rich, you're envied by others in your circle because you've done so well in certain ways. But Socrates said it's virtue, it's purpose. So and it's like it's what you feel in the moment. He talked about he could be happy even when he was imprisoned and people were going to execute him. That you couldn't take away my happiness even if you execute me. I'll be happy up until the moment because I'm happy with who I am, with how I am, with why I am, with what I am. All that you can't take away from me. So I've talked about my Uncle Hack, who didn't need much and went through life. I'm not saying he was happy all the time. I'm sure he wasn't. And there were times when I saw that he wasn't. And he could be upset with people too. But mostly life was good. He saw the glasses half full no matter what seemed to be happening. I talked about Viktor Frankl in one of the worst circumstances anybody can possibly imagine, being in a concentration camp in the Holocaust, and somehow coming away from that with his idea of man's search for meaning and finding meaning and purpose. So I think if you live a life where you're a virtuous, now, virtuous is interesting too. Socrates talked about this. What's virtuous? We all have different definitions of some of the. He was very big on what do words mean. What do words mean? And what I might think of as virtuous, you might not. You might not. But virtue seems to be at least defined as doing what seems to be the right thing, that most people would agree is the right thing, that sometimes is tough to do in the face of what's happening around you, and yet still doing the right thing. So virtue is this idea of doing what's right. And then finding purpose is, well, what do you want to say after you're gone? What was the reason you were here? Someone said I think this might have been Socrates too, but I'm not sure about this, that there are two great days in your life, two really great days in your life. The first is when you're born. The second is what you discover why you were born. You find out what your purpose is here. I'm pretty clear on that for me. I've been pretty steadfast around this conviction that even as a kid, I wanted to be helpful to other people. I wanted to be truly a uniter, a person who found ways to bring differing thoughts, different processes, different ideas, different convictions together so they could be talked about in meaningful ways. I wanted to help people to be okay with themselves, with the conflicts inside of us. Some of the toughest conflicts and challenges we face aren't with others, they're within us. And so over the years, I was a school counselor. I was a therapist, a family therapist. One of my great experiences in life was I went to work for a man who was known as one of the greatest college teachers in the world at the time. It's actually when Time Magazine was more meaningful than it is today. He was one of 7 college professors identified as one of the best college professors in the world. His name was Tony Athos, Anthony G. Athos, the Jesse Isidore professor at Harvard Business School. And he was a master in ways that I've never seen since or before of understanding the human condition and how it impacted organization and individual behavior. His profession was professor of organization behavior at Harvard Business School. And I got to work with him for a couple of years. And I worked with him because he found something special in me. It's funny. Sometimes when you go out to hire someone, you're looking for certain criteria, you're looking for certain competencies. That makes sense, right? You want to know what the job needs. What is somebody who needs to be good at the job need to be able to do, or at least be able to learn how to do? And Tony, at the time when I was over at Harvard, he was actually exploring a brand new model of organization management or transformational change management. It was something that he later labeled the 7S model of management. And he's doing it for this, I don't know if you know the world of the corporate world, but if you do, you know the name McKinsey. McKinsey Consulting Company. There's a lot of Harvard-educated MBAs from Harvard Business School who go into business, and they become consultants rather than run and lead organizations. But a lot of the people they go to school with run and lead organizations, so they're privileged in the sense that they know a lot of the people running large companies who come from Harvard Business School, and they're well connected. And they're, of course, I mean, you don't get there unless you're really smart, of course, and so they tend to have access to the top corridors of the most senior positions in very large companies, because somewhere in those companies are people that they went to school with and they got to know, who got to know them and respected their abilities. So Tony was in that world, and he was looking for somebody who could write case studies, somebody who had a background in and understood business and understood finances and operations and human behavior and strategy and all those things, the structure, how they fit together to make for successful entities in the business world. And he came in and he came into the interview where I had scheduled a time to meet with him. He said, "Chuck, tell me about yourself." And so I did. And he said, "You know, I've never had such an amazing experience." And I said, "Excuse me, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you know what? You don't have any of the skills I need." Not really. That doesn't mean you can't develop them, but you don't have them. It'd be so much easier if I hired somebody right from Harvard Business School. I was in the Graduate School of Education, but went across the river to down the road, actually, to get to Harvard Business School to interview for this. And he said, "But I'm going to hire you anyway." I thought I didn't have any chance at all when he first said what he said. And then he said, "But I want to hire you anyway because I'm so intrigued by who you are, what you are, why you are." And that's where those questions sort of came from. I want to get to know you better. And so you and I are going to get close over the next year and a half or so. And we did. And he became someone who mentored me, and someone who I can't tell you how much what he did with me and for me and helped me learn how much it mattered and meant in my life. But he was somebody that wasn't always happy. It was interesting. He always engaged in big struggles and powerful struggles where he became the advocate for the human element in the business world. And as you might expect, those of you that know the business world at high levels and senior levels, that's a battle that's hard to win. But Tony, in the fights that he was in, he won most of those battles. And that gave him purpose, and that created happiness for him. And for McKinsey and Company, he created the 7S model. It's funny about it. He said that, If you're going to go into organizations and you want a model that's sustainable, that people are going to remember, that people are going to work with, that it won't be hard for them to recall, because there's so many management models. There's C models, S models, D models. There's all kinds of models out there with little acronyms and ways of trying to remember them. But he said 7 S's. 7 is the most items most people can remember. You get past 7, people are never going to pay attention to it. Too many things to remember. Even when I say that, I think if you read a storybook, you're gonna think about, there's more than 7 characters. I'm starting to get lost here. But if you have a few main characters and a few peripheral characters, 7 seems to be a pretty common number for what works for lots of things. So Tony said 7. And it has to be alliterative. It has to be the same letter. So it's easy to remember. You create a bunch of different letters. There's so many different words for the same things that people get confused. But if they know it's all S's, that's what he wanted to use was S's, then you create it. So what makes me happy is to sometimes reflect on the people that I've known over the years and I've gotten to work with, and to bring their ideas to life in my own life in ways that take them to another further into the cosmos, into the world's experience, into this idea that I thought, can I take what I learned from Tony about the 7S model of management? Because that was all being developed when I was there with him. This was 1981, 82. I'm old. And I had the experience to work with him way back when. But in working with him, I learned that model. I actually got to teach that model in the very first case study that was taught at Harvard Business School. As his associate, one day he wasn't feeling quite right. He said, Chuck, you've been working with me on this model. Why don't you go and you teach it today? It's the first time we're going to be teaching these executives about the 7S model. You go do it. I was so excited to do that for him. And that's another thing that makes me happy, is someone believing in me and someone believing in you, right? Doesn't that, well, at least for a lot of people, it's another piece of what makes us happy, is when people believe in us and when we come through. Let me see time-wise. So one of the things that Socrates did was he basically gave us the idea that virtue and purpose aligned with our feelings of happiness make life great. Viktor Frankl gave us this idea that we can find purpose and meaning and a degree of happiness even in the most hurtful, harmful circumstances in terms of our physical situation. And then my Uncle Hack, which is what I started this conversation with, was someone who just cared so much about others, was so interested in others. He was the one in our family that tracked down, where did we come from? He went way back into Russia, and we found that we have family origins in Russia. And I learned something about my family I never would have learned if he didn't do it. And he started to contact people that came out of his research that were cousins that didn't know they were cousins. And he was just somebody who just loved to talk to people, find out who they were, what they were, how they were. Now, he wasn't the teacher at Harvard Business School, but he taught me lessons as important as what I learned there. You don't need a lot to be happy. What you need a lot of is love and support and empathy, not only from others for you, but you for others as well. That, at least for me, is what makes a life, a happiness. And Socrates, the way he went about it was very analytic, but he pushes you to think through what keeps you from being happy. When you feel most happy, what is going on in your life? And he helps you to think through those questions. So I suggest for you that you spend some time thinking through, like I said, there's 2 special days, when you're born and when you realize why you were born. Why were you born? What do you want said about you before you go? And is it the things that you're working on today? And if not, why not start? Why not take that wheel and control how you feel about you? About how others feel about you. And part of the way you do that, in my mind at least, is you focus not just on you feeling happy, but making the people that you care about, that you love, that you support, that you want to befriend, that somehow making others happy leads to a legacy of happiness and a feeling inside of a deep-rooted happiness inside you and others. So again, I'll give you a chance to call if you want to react to any of this and you just want to share what makes you happy. I'd love to chat with somebody if you're out there listening. The number is 405-649-0050. And once you've typed that in, the PIN is 927-263-232 and the pound sign. I'll give you a minute to go. Excuse me a second. As I said, I've got a little cold today, but I still wanted to come in and do the show. I like doing the show. So if I don't have a caller, which apparently we don't, so I want to just tell you a little bit about what's coming up next week. I'm very excited. There's a client of mine. Her name is Tamara, and she's the owner, female-owned business since 2022, wholly owned, of a Midwestern transportation and warehousing company and real estate company. And she's been a client of mine for several years now. And we're going to be talking about how I took Tony Athos's model, his 7S model, which, by the way, started with something called superordinate goals at the heart of it. Tony always said, for the model, it has to have a heart. Why does it exist? Why does this organization exist? As a person, why do you exist? What's at the heart of why existence is here? And he called it superordinate goals, things that are hard to explain and talk about, but somehow you know are what drives why this exists. And surrounding whatever the reasons are for existence, surrounding superordinate goals with what he later called hard S's, organization structure, how are we formed, strategy, how are our planning operations evolving from 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year to strategy to several years out? And what are the systems that we put in place to help us know how we're doing, to track whatever metrics we think are important to understand and manage? So it was structure, strategy, and systems. Those are the hard S's. The soft S's was skills. What do we need inside this organization to make this work? What type of skills? And what people have those skills? Staff. What type of positions do we need? Do we need human resources? Should we sub it out? Should we have it inside our company? Should we have operations? To what degree? To what degree do we have financial people? To what degree do we have people who are doing the planning, strategy? And what are the staffing issues we have? So skills, staff, and style. And style, what Tony meant by style, as I understood it, it was culture. How do we work together? How do we operate together? What makes this a fun place to work? Now, just to repeat them real quick, it was superordinate goals surrounded by strategy, structure, systems, skills, style, and staff. Now, superordinate goals worked for a while, but a lot of people found it difficult to talk about. And then over time, one of the McKinsey people came up with the idea, let's change it to shared values at the heart. That was very popular for a long time. But I've changed it in the last few years with my client, Tamara, we're going to talk about this, to shared feelings. Now, I say shared feelings because I mentioned that I work with Tony Athos. I also, if you've listened before, you know I work with Peter Salve, who later became the president of Yale University. We're still friends, and we still talk, and we still try to make the world a better place. But at the time, in the 1990s, Peter and his colleague Jack Mayer discovered emotional intelligence. They were the first psychologists to write about it. No one had heard the term, well, I shouldn't say no one, but the term never really came to life until they wrote about it in 1990. And then it was publicized by another person, Dan Goleman. I've gotten to know and befriend. And Dan is probably the most prolific author writing about it. But anyway, Peter and Jack and their colleague David Crusoe taught me about emotional intelligence. And when I began to understand how emotions work, they said, we know we have emotional abilities, the ability to identify how people are feeling and ourselves are feeling. We have the ability to identify how to use emotions, the ability to basically understand how emotions work and the ability to manage emotions. But we're all not the same in those abilities. And the differences matter. And that's a much longer story. But what I have learned is quite a bit about how to make us better at all of that. Is basically my emotion roadmap was the concept when they asked me to come to work with them was help us make this useful to people. And my emotion roadmap, which starts with how do you feel? And based on what you're trying to get done is how you feel, how you want to feel. And if it might not be, what would be ideal to feel? Because another thing I learned from them is that there are better emotions for certain tasks than others. Most of us just push through with whatever we're feeling. But I now know that some of the feelings I have might be an obstacle to what I'm trying to get done. So I know how to change them now. But understanding how you feel, that's the third question. So if what you feel isn't what you need to feel, and you know what you need to feel, how do you get there? That's the concept of a roadmap. And then in terms of the strategies we come up with, what are we really able to do and willing to do? And that's the management piece, to get done what we need to get done emotionally so that we're in the best possible situation to have success with whatever we're trying to do. And our emotions are not obstacles, but they're actually fuel what we're doing. So Tamara's going to come on, and we're going to talk about how we created this shared feelings concept for her organization. So I'm combining the work of my mentor, Tony Athos, my colleague, Peter Salve, and Jack Mayer, and David Caruso, my colleagues. And I'm doing this in my own way, in my own time, with someone who owns a truck driving organization. And my dad was a truck driver when I was growing up. My dad, I used to love to go out on trucks with my dad. So for me, this is full circle, bringing together three people I really care about, and finding ways to take everything I learned from all of them, put them together, and make life better. And that's what we'll be talking about with Tamara next week. I think, and I hope Tamara likes this title, but I look at it as one of the guys that works with her. And again, you think about warehousing people and trucking. They're not people that want to talk about emotions particularly necessarily. A lot of people aren't, but these particular groups stereotypically aren't. And one of the guys says, you know what I want people to feel? I want them to feel accountable. That's what I want. And, most of the time people are thinking about feelings, they think about pride, appreciation, respect. But accountable, wow, I love that. And then he said, I want people to have fun here. And so I think the culture they've created is joyful accountability. And that's what I'll be talking about next week. So thanks for listening, everybody. I'm Chuck Wolf. This has been the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And I'm signing off, and I'll be back with you next Tuesday. Take care. Bye-bye.
For over 40 years, SCM
has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education,
and live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SEM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SEM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.